Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bearded Robot podcast with me, Peter, and my co-host, Danny.
Hi, everyone.
How are you, Dan? You okay?
Yeah, not so bad, mate. Yeah, yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm still enjoying the lockdown podcast episodes.
Yeah, it's been a little while, but I think
Yeah,
that's because we've both been a little too engrossed in our current topic.
yes. So, as you may have guessed by the title, we're going to talk about The Last of Us 2 today. Both myself and Dan have been playing it for about the last month, and I think we've probably both wrapped up around, the kind of 25-hour mark. I think that's about right, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's been a great game. It's had its highs, had its lows, had its controversies, which we're going to kind of cover throughout the episode.
Yeah, we did have an idea to do another podcast in between, but we were both really kind of fixated on The Last of Us 2, and it was kind of like we didn't really feel that we could give a different topic as much attention because we were so sort of in the mindset of this game, you know.
You do, yeah, and with games, you do kind of get engrossed and in the mindset, and you become part of that world when you're playing a game, don't you? That you end up not being able to really concentrate or think about anything else.
As long as it's a good game.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, generally, if you've got an Elder Scrolls come out, or you've got a GTA come out, or a game like The Last of Us, or a Final Fantasy, you just kind of plunge yourself into that world, and that's the beauty of gaming, I guess.
Yeah, it's
But
real
anyway,
escapism, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. But anyway, we digress. So I think that one thing I wanted to say actually is that we're going to actually make this episode slightly shorter. We kind of wanted to kind of give more of an overview of the really kind of key points. Our previous episodes have more been extremely long discussions of kind of our thoughts on everything, whereas we've actually really put this together and kind of agendaed it. So it's going to be cool. So yeah, make sure you let us know kind of how you feel about this kind of format, as compared to others and stuff like that. But it'd be really handy.
Yeah, we got a little too carried away last time in all the times in our conversations, and it's just like as if like me and Peter were sitting in the pub talking about this, and that's kind of like the idea that we're kind of going for. But maybe we could try and shorten it down so it's a bit more of a biteable package.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of our selling point, really. We want it to kind of come across that way. So if you prefer it that way, then kind of let us know. That's fine. But another thing we're going to kind of do is, and this will be a new thing. We'll see kind of how it goes. But we're actually going to score the game at the end. So I'll give you my score out of 10. Danny will give his score out of 10 on the game. In this case, The Last of Us 2. So definitely stick around for that.
Yeah. Also, one thing I wanted to say is that this episode is kind of split into two chunks. We've got a first chunk that won't cover any sort of spoilers of the game, so that way anyone who hasn't played the game can listen to this part of the podcast and still enjoy it. And then we'll announce that we're going to cover the story, and then that's when it gets into real spoiler territory. Because the thing with The Last of Us 2 story, it is really enjoyable if it hasn't been spoiled for you. To actually experience it firsthand is actually, the main thing. And obviously we'll cover this in a lot more in depth, but that's a lot of the reason why some of the controversy has come about is probably because the story was spoiled for other people before, so they kind of knew the twists and stuff like that. So definitely check it out for yourselves.
I think you've summed that up perfectly. I think that The Last of Us needs to be experienced in context and not via hearsay, memes, or just a couple of clips you may have watched. And Dan's absolutely spot on there. We'll let you know as soon as we're kind of entering spoiler territory. So don't worry, there will be an alert. Let's crack on then. So the first kind of thing I kind of think we should talk about is our kind of history with The Last of Us. So for anyone that kind of, I guess, doesn't know, The Last of Us is a PlayStation exclusive. The original, the first game, The Last of Us, came out on PS3.
Yep.
It was quite a long time ago.
2013.
Yeah, wow. I'm glad you did your research. Yeah, I knew. Yeah, it was. Christ, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? I mean, and you know, I mean, I'll just kind of give a kind of bit of an overview of my kind of love for The Last of Us, and then we'll kind of get your thoughts, Dan. But when I first played The Last of Us, or when I first heard of The Last of Us, I was watching an E3 press conference, and I was watching it with my friend Craig, and we'd heard this game, The Last of Us, was coming, and it was kind of around the time where, and I'm going to say zombies, and even though I actually hate the word zombies nowadays, even though it was kind of when zombies were still being done well, and when that kind of infection 28 days later type kind of genre was really it was still at its height, and we all know that it's kind of been milked till the cows come home, and we all know that kind of in infection and zombie and that kind of genre has been so milked. But I remember it coming out at a time where The Walking Dead was still massive and stuff like that,
and still good.
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah, and those sort of TV shows and games were still really big. I mean, one of the originals for me was Left 4 Dead. Without digressing too much, but those sort of games were coming out, and 28 Days Later, and the Walking Dead comics, and all of that, and you're kind of thinking, wow, this is such a cool genre. And I know that Day of the Dead and those sort of films were kind of the originals; they were the daddies. But this kind of more,
it brought into the mainstream, didn't it? Kind of, and then suddenly after that, everyone doing it, like you said, everyone milked it to the point where it become like, oh, it's got a zombie mode, how typical, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is that it was still really kind of big. And I remember watching it with my friend, and we were both just like, this game looks so good. And it wasn't just about the fact that it was kind of going to be an infected type game, and it was the fact that it was going to be a big story. The graphics looked stunning. The gameplay looked amazing. It looked brutal. I remember watching the intro, or one of the intros that they played at the E3 conference, and just kind of looking at it and going, wow, this looks stunning, and it looks so brutal. Like it looks really raw, and the game did end up being that. It's one of the rawest, grittiest games I've ever played, The Last of Us, and actually I ranked it as my my second place game of the decade,
which is big praise.
I mean, Dan and I have played a lot of games. They're right up our street, and I'm ranking that above the likes of Mass Effect 2, and Kingdom Come, which were games that I absolutely adored. And to be honest with you, it's really up there with The Witcher 3 for me, which is my personal favourite game of the decade. So The Last of Us is well up there. So yeah, fast forwarding, playing The Last of Us, it was actually exactly what I wanted it to be. An amazing game, an amazing story, one of the best stories kind of told, even though it's quite simple. It's just told in such a clever, raw way, and you really buy into all of the characters. And that's kind of my kind of loving for The Last of Us, if you will. So I didn't necessarily think that there needed to be a second game. I still don't even know if there needed to be a second game. We'll go on to that. But at the same time, it was an amazing game, and I was really buzzing to see that there was a part 2 coming out. So So anyway, Dan, enough from me. Kind of, where do you stand with The Last of Us?
Yeah, well, I'm in the same boat. I would put it up there in probably at least my top 10 favourite games of all time. It's in there somewhere. I couldn't possibly put that list into order, because I love all those games for different reasons. But it's definitely in there. I mean, I love, I'm a big zombie and post-apocalyptic kind of fan. I love anything like that, like Fallout and, The Walking Dead and stuff like that. And yeah, this kind of ticked all the boxes for me. It blended kind of action and horror perfectly, and you know, for me, that is a real kind of winner when it comes to gaming. I mean, the story, yeah, like you say, it is simple story, but it's really told well. It's got relatable characters who are just like really enjoyable to play as and whatnot. Clever mechanics. I mean, Naughty Dog really do kind of knock it out of the park in some respects. Like, obviously they do the Uncharted games, which are all like really enjoyable and like clever and funny, and like loads of great details that we'll cover some from the second game in a moment. But yeah, the only thing with The Last of Us, the first one, I mean, it has a lot of I never want to experience that moment ever again. You know, so many moments like that. Like, I can think of, off the top of my head, maybe about 4 or 5. I mean, you've got just quickly. I won't go into this too much, but like, you've got the hotel basement. Is a terrible scene. And there's a couple. There's a load of others that I'm sure that if I really went through it, we could go into. But yeah, the actual that for me made it a fantastic game, you know, and because it had those moments that I'm still scared of them now, you know, kind of thing. And yeah, it was just a really good game all round.
Yeah, and you hit you are now on the head there with the horror of it. And actually, another thing that you mentioned, which isn't necessarily considered when you think about The Last of Us, but it absolutely is it is funny. It's got real funny moments in it, like whether it's kind of dry kind of sense of humor, whether it's sarcastic sense of humor, or just generally kind of quite witty, funny characters at times, and kind of points where you're. One thing The Last of Us does so well, and same with The Last of Us 2, is when you are travelling around with a companion, listening to their conversations,
the sort of banter between them, really, they've done well to make it not believable. It doesn't, because some games it's really forced. It feels a bit annoying, you know, the way they speak and talk to one another. But I felt in The Last of Us, it felt real in a sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and I do also agree with the bits that you kind of, you know, you look back on, you think, oh, I really don't want to play that again because that was not good. It gave me butterflies, gave me anxiety, and
it's not a bad thing. It's not like it's not like a bad moment, like some terrible boss fight that was absolutely dog shit, like the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls or something like that. I don't know why it always comes back to Dark Souls. But,
always.
Always, but it's kind of just moments that were so intense that it was like, oh my god! Like I went to replay it before playing number 2, and I was like, you know what? I can't bring myself to do it. I don't want to do that again. I'm happy knowing I've done it before.
Yeah. Do you know what? Funnily enough, it's actually one of the first games ever, the Last of Us, the part 1, that I actually finished the game. And I don't know if you remember, I literally just started it again and I replayed the entire game again. Cool. Okay. Well, let's talk about gameplay then. So, gameplay for The Last of Us 2, in conjunction, I guess, with the first game as well. I mean, there isn't a gigantic difference in terms of gameplay. Just in terms of it's an action, it's a shooter / stealth game / mini RPG. It's got kind of character development.
Got a bit of crafting thrown in there.
Yeah, absolutely, crafting and everything like that. Did you see a massive jump from the first game to the second game? Do you think they really improved on it?
No, not all really. I mean, to be fair, the first game was really good mechanic-wise, so there wasn't too much they could build upon. So they've added a few sort of key things here and there, and such as like more sort of weapon crafting. Sort of you can upgrade your weapons now, and sort of you can go prone as well, which kind of helps a lot more. And yeah, they've just kind of really just added upon it, really, with lots of little details and stuff. A few sort of unnecessary things or things that they sort of tried to do that kind of made it a little bit different, such as the random guitar playing mechanic. So obviously your character will randomly find like perfect condition guitars knocking about in cases most of the time. It's always like this very similar guitar, you know, like the acoustic one. And Naughty Dog have put a lot of effort into sort of how the character's fingers move, like in conjunction with playing the guitar. You sort of strum it using the touch screen of the controller. And I've seen on YouTube a lot of people have been playing real songs using this mechanic, so it's quite a cool little thing, if not completely random, you know.
Yeah, no, I saw that as well, actually. And I was actually listening to the official podcast, the official Last of Us podcast, with the writer Neil Druckmann, and they were actually saying on that podcast that they really put a lot of effort into those close-ups. So during cutscenes and stuff like that, you'll see a lot of close-ups of, you know, like a finger strumming a guitar and stuff like that. And it was a really they kind of mentioned how it was quite a ballsy thing to do, because if you kind of get something that intricate right, as kind of fingers strumming a guitar, and they look a bit wrong or look a bit off, you know, the gaming community will destroy it. You know,
you've got kind of two choices, haven't you? You can either make it look cheap, in which case you'll say, well, I'm not going to bother doing each finger touching the right string. You know, it's a computer game at the end of the day. Why do I need that? Or you have to go full in, because like you say, if you go in the middle ground, they'll tear you apart.
Exactly. And you mentioned about prone there as well. So that was another kind of interesting element to me. I mean, there was introduced into The Last of Us 2, you had long grass and foliage and stuff like that your character could actually go prone in and kind of crawl around in. And that added a kind of a slightly different dimension, I guess, to from the original game, where you in The Last of Us, you generally just crouched around between cover to cover, whereas in this game you could crouch in long grass, you could go prone in long grass, and that was another way of kind of evading enemies, I guess. So it was quite a cool thing to add. I didn't actually use it much personally, but
because we kind of played a little bit differently in some areas, at least. Like when I would go back to Peter and say, "Oh, how did you get on with this bit?" He'd tell me, or you know, or whatever. I used it a little bit more for getting past enemies. So you kind of killed everyone in the area sort of stealthily before moving on to the next area, because the game essentially is playing through section, encounter, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, and I knew you killed all the enemies before moving on to the next section. You know,
yeah, I'm a bit of a clearer. I like to kind of clear my area, and I discovered crafting of the silencers for the handgun quite early on, and I was using that. I remember telling you, "Oh, I'm using silencers," and you were like, "Oh, I've not come across silencers just yet," and I think because I come across them so early, I was just obsessed with them. I loved using the silencer to take down enemies. I've kind of always been a bit like that. I like to kind of take down all of the enemies around me and then kind of go exploring all the nook and crannies, reading up all of the notes that you find, and finding, you know, additional crafting materials and stuff like that. That's kind of always been my jam. And I always have this fear that I'm going to lose out on
that's an item. Yeah, that's a good point, because this does happen in The Last of Us too. One gripe that I personally have is a couple of the areas are quite big and intricate, that it feels almost unnatural to kind of, unless of course you kill everyone and you're intentionally looking for it, like you say you did, you know, kind of thing. If you're trying to get through it, it kind of doesn't feel natural to kind of then go off on, you found the exit, but you thought, hang on, I haven't really checked that area. I'm going to go check there for like upgrades or, you know, whatnot. So in that regard, for me, there was a few areas that just felt a little too big in that respect, because a lot of the time the game's linear and there are sort of choices of how you can approach certain situations, but just not like off the top of my head, the Capitol Hill section of The Last of Us 2 is very sort of, is big, and there's quite a lot of different ways to go, like maybe too many for my personal taste.
Yeah, and that wasn't really the case in the first game. You kind of had these areas where, yeah, like you would be able to kind of explore a load of different rooms in a hotel, or you would be able to explore a load of different floors, or you would be out on the street and be able to explore some different houses and some different um, shops along the way. But it felt
Yeah,
more linear, and it kept the pacing of the game a little bit more kind of on track. And so I do agree with you. Certainly in some of the big areas on The Last of Us 2, I found myself, you know, without going into spoilers, you're kind of on this mission to kind of, to do this certain thing and to get it done, and it's really really important, and you're kind of climbing up into a room to find a safe and look in a safe. Now, I know that your character needs to be scavenging and finding new guns and items and crafting material and bullets, etc. I get all of that, but if it was me, if it was actually me and I was in that character's position, would I be sitting there reading, a 4-page document, that was kind of left behind by the military when I'm hell bent on revenge or whatever, So
that is always the way. I mean,
yeah.
and that's always been a thing for games. They try, they've got to tell the story in a unique way that isn't going to really bog down the game, so that it's not like a Kojima game where we're just watching hours of cutscenes. But at the same time, you think of like BioShock, where most of it is through audio tapes, and you can just imagine your character just sitting there in a corner in amongst all the chaos, just listening to an audio tape before moving forward. It just feels, a little bit unrealistic in that sense. So I know what you mean.
Yeah, and don't
One
get me wrong. I don't mind, finding a letter written by a distraught dad who's lost his family, and then you find another letter from him later, and then you later find out that his wife's still alive and he never found out, and you feel really devastated for him, and stuff like that. I don't mind those sort of letters. It's just sometimes, especially in the big areas, I just think, well, I've been here for hours just searching, and you know what? Maybe my character should get their bloody arse moving.
Yeah, I mean, you'll look at the afterwards. You can look at like the level select sort of option and see what collectibles you've missed, and you probably still have missed a load of collectibles in that area. So there's a lot to do. At least for supplicant playthroughs, you can go collectible hunting and stuff like that. So it has got good replayability in that sense. I mean, we'll cover this a bit more in a moment about, there is a lot of replayability in The Last of Us 2, which is good. But one thing is one last gripe, because honestly, I love the gameplay. Don't get me wrong. It was great. It was great from start to finish, and most of the game is brilliant. There was one moment though that was it's like a big free roam area. It's a bit random. You're in like you've got like this large sort of section of the city that's kind of cordoned off, but you can explore it freely on a horse, and there's loads of little side missions and all this, that, and the other. It's like like some games, you'll get to a little sandbox and there'll be loads of little side missions you can go and do, and then you'll push forward in the story, and then you'll come across another sandbox and so forth and so forth. You'll do maybe like 3 or 4 of them in the entire game. But in The Last of Us, I thought it was going to be doing that, and I didn't mind it per se, but it did kind of feel a little bit like they were like clogging up the game, and they are, let's expand the runtime by stuffing all this kind of open world and side missions in. But it turned out that it only happened the once, and for me that just felt really fucking random. It felt. Yeah, it was just a weird. It felt almost pointless at the end. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it whilst I was doing it, but looking back, that just felt like a really weird mechanic to suddenly just throw into quite near the beginning of the game and then never do again.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually, funny enough, again, listening to the official podcast like I was today, they did reference that. Funny enough, and I kind of feel. I mean, it's interesting the way that you've experienced that. I'm not quite sure it's how they wanted you to experience that. I think they kind of mentioned how they wanted the pacing to be done really well, so they wanted to change up different, different areas and different gameplay mechanics, so it was always nice and fresh. But I do agree with you, it kind of did come across maybe a little bit random if you never kind of had to do it again, you know. And so yeah, I don't disagree with you on that actually. And generally speaking, the open areas, they weren't massively for me, although every now and then when you did come across in the open area a small little subsection that you could get down into, and again, without going into spoilers, you find a bank and you kind of enter this bank and it's a completely side area. I loved that sort of thing, you know, and it almost felt like a little dungeon crawl almost, you know.
It was rewarding as well.
It was, yeah, and that's one thing I will say is that all of these areas that you can kind of explore in kind of greater detail, they're all optional, but they're all very rewarding. So that's one thing that a lot of games don't do very well. Side missions and side areas are not very rewarding. They're just gameplay filler, and it just adds hours and hours onto the game for no reason. At least, even if you necessarily, maybe a bit like us, didn't necessarily enjoy those gigantic sections and, you know, being there for hours, and it did kind of, you know, take you out of the game a little bit, at least there was the fact that it was extremely rewarding to kind of come back to.
Yeah, that's the same with the safes, really. I mean, to be fair, I know I was saying, oh yeah, I might have missed this, that, or the other, but when I actually looked back, it turns out I'd only actually missed one safe in the entire game. So
oh, really?
I must have done. Yeah, I actually got it on my second playthrough because it was in the sort of first section of the game for some reason. I missed that, but so yeah, so I did actually kind of come across these saves quite naturally, but still there was a lot of things that obviously I had missed that I felt that. Like, because for example, you can upgrade the character with you find these kind of books and they unlock a new skill tree that you can sort of go into. You've got like stealth ones, action sort of shooting ones about crafting, ones about sort of scavenging and stuff like this, and each one will give you sort of different abilities, and you need to find like bottles of pills in the world that will give you enough points to be able to spend to unlock new skills. But you can actually go a whole game with missing like one of the skill trees, and for me, I didn't like the idea of that I would miss that whole skill tree, you know, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, completely, because you feel you're missing out on a large kind of part of the game, and then kind of improving of your character. So yeah, I do agree with that. Luckily, that if you do play like us, and like I presume most people do play, and that's very thorough, and, you know, trying to take in all of the scenery, trying to get through all the nooks and crannies and enjoying all the puzzles, you know, to kind of be able to get up and into a building, chances are you will find all of that stuff. I mean, I didn't miss anything like that, and I wouldn't exactly say that I was, you know,
going out of your way to find everything.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I didn't miss any of that, but there was a couple of times when I found something because I'd kind of gone out of my way, and I thought to myself, I could have missed this.
You could have missed it. Yeah, and I guess that's what, you know, that's a good thing, I guess, because it does reward you for exploring a little more and kind of paying a bit more attention to detail. Maybe people that are kind of rushing through the game will just not get as much satisfaction out of it.
Yeah, it's a real double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, it's good, and it's kind of it tilts on bad, but again, it's not going to lose any real points in that regard, in my eyes, if you know what I mean.
No, for sure. How did you feel about the weapons, without going into too much detail about the weapons themselves, you know, due to spoilers and stuff? I thought there was a really kind of quite nice range of weapons, whether you wanted to be a bit more hardcore and a melee point of view, or whether you wanted to be a bit more ranged or stealthy. I thought it was some really satisfying use of weapons, especially stuff like shotguns. You know, they really, really helped in a bind. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I can think of this one monumental moment where because normally I played the game quite stealthy, so I was stealth killing a lot of enemies and stuff, and sometimes that can get a little bit dull because you've been doing it for so long. You know, it's the most effective and realistic way of playing the game, but sometimes you think, you know what, I've got all these fucking guns. I'm gonna use them. You know, I want to kick off a bit. But thankfully, one point the game did that for me. It forced my hand, and I was running through this house, and this enemy come out in front of me. I think she had it was a woman. She had a metal pole, and I had my shotgun equipped, and I literally just blew her whole head apart, and it was so gruesome, but it was so quick that it was an amazing moment. If you know what I mean. But it was so much detail that I had to actually stop and look at her corpse in that regard. I think I'd actually taken off one of her arms as well. So it was a real gruesome death. And then I looked down at her body, and you could see through like the neck hole, the blood was pumping out. Oh, it was gruesome as arsehole.
It is. There's so much detail. I've heard people say that, and again, we're not saying kind of glorified violence for the sake of it. These games are gritty. They're realistic. And I was reading that somebody had said that if you explode a corpse, or if you explode a body, and it kind of splatters all up the wall and on the ceiling, over time, bits of that will drop onto the floor. And I just thought the attention to detail is just absolutely insane. It's so cool.
It is insane. I mean, this was actually one thing I picked up right at the beginning of the game. I mean, obviously, no spoilers here, but you start off in kind of like a community kind of thing, and there's people just going about their normal daily lives. And I was and sometimes in games, you might just run through past all these NPCs without even paying attention. But sometimes I kind of go out of my way to have a look at them to see what they're doing, because some games they'll just be not really doing anything, and you'll think, oh, that's a little cheap. But The Last of Us 2, there really is so much unnecessary detail, like we're saying with the guitar fingers. But in this sort of settlement, I came across a man who was holding like a little toddler's hand, and he's walking with her, and there were some steps coming up ahead, and the whole point of this section was you just walking through town and you just walk past them. But I was like, no, actually, I want to see where this is going. I want to see if that toddler cheaply walks down those stairs. And the man, it was so good. The man stopped, he got to the bottom of the stairs, and he turned around and held out his arms, and then she jumped into his arms, and then he carried her off. And it was just so good, but it's cool. Proper unnecessary. That's so unnecessary, but it's amazing at the same time.
Yeah, attention. I'm glad you brought that up. It just kind of goes to show the attention to detail that's gone in this game. And no matter how you feel about the gameplay mechanics, no matter how you feel about the controversies, which we'll get into, no matter how you feel about any of that, this game has got an extreme level of attention to detail. It's clearly one of the best games, kind of of a generation. When you look at the detail that's kind of gone into it. So yeah, no, definitely worth bringing that up.
I mean, Naughty Dog always knock it out of the park with that. I mean, you find a gas canister at one point because you need to fill something up with petrol, and she pops it in her bag. And easily that could have been it, but they've got the little bit of the tank hanging out of the bag, and I just thought it was nice little touches like that. With regards to the weapon crafting, however, it does feel like it takes an age for her to get her gun out and dismantle it in front of you. So it's kind of... and yeah, it's good, but I kind of want you to hurry up because I want to add this upgrade on and get moving, But, so that's the only time I noticed that the attention to detail was a bit long-winded.
Yeah, although I must admit, I've really enjoyed, if you because what Dan's saying is you get to kind of crafting benches along the way, and you can interact with them, and you'll lay your gun on the table, and if you kind of add a silencer to it or a scope to it or whatever, she'll physically kind of craft it and weld it on, sort of thing, and you'll physically see that happen. And I must admit, the first few times of watching that, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. This feels so real. I'm going out with a brand new kind of built on my shotgun, which is going to give it better stability, and this is amazing. I must admit, after a while, you did kind of go, oh god, I can't be bothered to watch her kind of dismantle it again. But I suppose it does add to the kind of the gritty realism element to it, and again, it just goes to show that attention to detail again. Absolutely brilliant. Is there anything else just on the gameplay that you wanted to cover, Dan?
Yeah. So sorry, going back to the attention to detail just quickly. Melee weapons are brutal as well. Again, just like real life, you can imagine. Hitting someone with like a metal bar that you've attached a knife to, because you can do that in the crafting section, and it's really gruesome and really kind of feels like you are absolutely hitting them. It's not like a Dynasty Warriors game where you're just carving through enemies like butter. You feel the impact in like the controller and everything. But no, moving forward, gameplay wise, the game has got a lot of replay value here. So obviously you can replay in each individual chapter of the game, and I think there's like 18 of them, something around that. So I think you can pick each individual chapters. You can just play that if you're just hunting for collectibles or something of the sort, because I think you get, like, if you're a trophy hunter, you can get trophies for finding the collectibles, you find them for the crafting tables and all the safes. So there's a lot there that you can go back and do. Replaying the game, you can do new game plus, so that's good. So because obviously your character gets all the skills and whatnot, and you can transfer them over straight away. So, and it's quite good because when you unlock a weapon, because the weapons you still unlock naturally as you did do the first time you played it, but once you've unlocked that weapon, it's got all this it's got all the attachments and modifications that you made to it in your last run through. So that's a good little touch. And also, they've added this custom difficulty, because obviously the game offers, like, easy, medium and hard and whatnot, and various sort of a few other difficulties in amongst them. And I feel, obviously, you should definitely play this game on normal, because the some of the enemies on the easier difficulties, because I'm playing on this custom difficulty, I'll get to that in a second. Some of the enemies are a little stupid, the AI on the easier difficulties. It's like, well, I'd be able to see that, in real life, so why can't he see me there? Whereas in like normal upwards, it's obviously a lot more challenging, it's a lot more realistic in that sense. But yeah, custom difficulty, so you can select how hard the enemies are, how good, how often you get not collectibles, like scavenging equipment and stuff like that, enemy drops items, and how easy detectable you are. So you can really sort of play around with it for your second run through, which is quite a nifty little feature.
Yeah, no, it is a cool feature. I mean, I know you're a fan of that feature. I can't believe I'm about to say these words again. You're going to be like, oh, for God's sake. But Dark Souls.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
I'm not a fan of difficulty settings. I love games like GTA and Dark Souls, where you've got no gameplay setting. It's just, it is what it is. They've made this game to be a challenge, and you really do need to kind of get good at the game and kind of and all of that. I do get that people want to play it for a purely narrative point of view, so I'm happy for it to be in there. I'm not sure it appeals to me to kind of go through personally and edit all of the different kind of settings. I'll either want to play it on hard or play it on normal, and I don't know, but I don't see it as a bad thing, I guess, to kind of have the option there, and it is quite a cool feature, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm playing it purely custom difficulty second time round, just because I wanted to sort of explore a bit more. So I've kind of made Ellie a bit more of a bullet sponge and stuff like that. And I've made it so that I haven't got to worry about scavenging for items. So I've made it easy in that regard, but I've made the enemies a bit harder to kind of counterbalance that. So you can sort of create a unique experience for yourself. But yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. It would be, after you've played it the first time on normal, you'll probably want to jump straight into hard.
Yeah, maybe, but you have made a good point there, to be fair, because being able to play the game in a slightly different way, so maybe having lots of bullets and tougher enemies, you could play it much less stealth and more kind of all guns blazing, and that's quite a cool idea, actually, isn't it, to kind of experience the game in a different way to how you have in your first place.
Yeah, because I'm not going into any spoiler territories, but kind of halfway through the game does try to force your hand into more action situations, and obviously because you played the majority of the game stealth, most people, you are still going to try and maintain that stealth, but the game does try and force your hand a couple of times.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's gameplay. Have you got any kind of thing else that you kind of wanted to add to that?
No, that's covered everything. You know,
I think overall, I think that from a gameplay perspective, I think that it plays exactly the same as, I completely agree with you. It plays exactly the same as The Last of Us. I think they've enhanced areas. I'm not necessarily sure they needed to, but they've kind of added in elements. Just quickly, actually, just popped into my head, which I just need to bring up is, I don't know how you felt about it, but I loved it. Is the breaking glass aspect in the game. So like you'll come across windows and stuff and be able to smash them with the hilt of your gun or throw a brick through them to kind of get into a building or whatever. But naturally doing that has its kind of its own issues, because you'll want to get into this building to loot it, an optional building, can I say? But then if you were to do that, you can attract a load of enemies to your kind of, to your spot or whatever. So you really have to be quite strategic about how you get into these buildings. And I just thought that was kind of quite a cool mechanic to kind of add in.
Yeah, you can use it to your advantage as well, such as like luring enemies over to that window.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it, exactly the same as you. The only problem was, it's just me being me, it's aesthetics. I'm thinking it's 25 years after the end of the world. How many windows are still going to be perfectly fine and not smashed, But that's neither here nor there, it's just a Danny gripe.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. I mean, like I say though, overall, I think really, really great gameplay. I think it plays really well. I think the stealth elements are amazing. I think the stealth kills are really satisfying. Yeah, okay, cool.
I mean, gameplay wise, I'd definitely give it at least an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Perfectly.
Yeah.
It's there's a like. I mean, it's not the greatest game I've ever played, but it is a great game to play. So it's I can't really fault it. Anything I have slagged off during this is purely nitpicking at the end of the day.
Yeah, and whilst you kind of, and whilst I agree with you, that you say it's maybe not the greatest game you've ever played. Yeah, of course not. But then if you think of that sentence in itself, it kind of does the game an injustice, because it is a phenomenal game, and we'll kind of get onto that. And I think this is a good place to say, actually, Dan, that I think the next section will talk more along spoiler territory. So we're going to be talking a bit more about the further storyline of the first game, which kind of leads into the second. The controversy surrounding The Last of Us 2. People may have heard about the leaks ahead of the game and all of that kind of stuff. We'll talk about our favourite moments, and we'll talk about the big ending as well, which again, a lot of controversy surrounding the ending, and we'll give our thoughts on what we thought about it and what our perceptions of kind of how everything went down was. Okay, so here is the big bit. We're going to talk about the story and the spoilers and all of the really kind of cool, exciting stuff. So I suppose, naturally, as I've kind of mentioned, if you haven't played the game and you really are sensitive to spoilers, then turn off right now. But if you're not intending on playing the game, or you don't care, then let's have some fun with the actual storyline itself. So yeah, Dan, I wanted to kind of talk about, because it's two parts. It's not two games. It's not The Last of Us 1 and The Last of Us 2. It's part 1 and part 2. They are the same game. And again, listening to the original, the official podcast, as I was earlier, Neil Druckmann did mention that this is the same game. This isn't two parts. So as much as some people would like to pretend this game never existed.
Right.
That's not the case. It's one game, and it's just done in two parts. So generally,
see, that annoys me a little. That annoys me, to be fair, because of Abby's story in that regard. Like, well, maybe in that case you should have introduced her in the first game then, mate, if that's the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good point, actually. And again, maybe jumping slightly forward, we'll come back to it. But I will say that one thing that they did say was that they didn't have The Last of Us Part 2 in mind when they even had finished part 1. Now, in retrospective, they look back and kind of say, yes, this is in 2 parts. And yes, one of the main character you're kind of hunting, which we'll get into, is somebody who was affected by something that happened in the first game, but that was never that was never a plan. It was only after The Last of Us Part 1 come out, so that's probably going to annoy you even more.
Yeah, that really does.
But okay, so the first game, just a really quick overview. You play as Joel, who is a kind of just your standard normal guy. When the outbreak happens, and we will talk about the infection, actually, that'd be really good to talk about, but essentially an outbreak happens,
and you play through that amazing section of the first game. That's something I did forget to mention in that first part of the podcast. Is the first part of the first game is absolutely phenomenal. The first sort of half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever it is. But yeah, sorry, I just thought I had to quickly add that in.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a stunning section, and so you play as a character called Joel. Really quickly, he's there. You're following him when the outbreak happens. It's kind of like an infection, a pandemic, kind of. Christ, let's not overthink that with what's going on at the moment. But essentially, when the outbreak happens, he tries to get away with his daughter and his brother, and they run into the military, who try to kill them, and they end up killing his daughter, which is, I can't, because I'm kind of skipping through a rough kind of explanation of the game, I can't understate how horribly emotional that actual part of the game is, and you don't even know Joel and his daughter Sarah yet.
It's a lot more haunting now that both of us have become parents since then. I mean, obviously, since when we played it, it was good in that regard, but now it's a lot more haunting, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, we're both with young girls as well, so we can definitely empathise massively. And then essentially Joel kind of is destroyed by it. He gets away himself with his brother. He ends up joining up with another crew, and it haunts him for, I think it's 20 years or whatever.
It is 20 years, because I remember when it come up 20 years later, I was like, mate, that is such a long amount of time. That is a horrendous amount of time. I thought it was going to be like a year or something.
It is, yeah. And he's haunted by it. He's gritty. He's done bad things. He doesn't give a shit. And he is given a job to smuggle a young girl who's, I think, about 12 or 13 in the game, to another group called the Fireflies, who are essentially trying to work on a vaccine. It turns out that the girl he's smuggling to this group called the Fireflies has been bitten in the past, which is covered in the DLC of the game, and she's immune. So everybody who gets bitten generally by an infected will turn within a few days, and then over the course of time they will kind of mutate and stuff like that, which we'll come on to. And essentially he gets this, they go on this massive journey, and you were there throughout all of it, protecting her, playing as Joel. There's a part where you play as Ellie, who's the girl he's transporting, to kind of save Joel, and they kind of meet up again, and essentially when it comes to the crunch, Joel finds out that the Fireflies are actually going to have to kill her to create the vaccine. It's kind of something to do with the brain, and they do explain it in very good scientific detail, which I definitely won't do it justice. So
they've
Joel
done a good
decides,
job as well throughout that of making it really like Joel kind of feels like it's his daughter at that point. You know, he's kind of
yeah,
taken. He didn't really want her around, but now after their journey throughout the course of the first game, he's really like he's become a proper father figure to her.
yeah.
You know, just to mimic his relationship with his own deceased daughter.
Yeah, and you know that can come across really kind of cliche, but it doesn't. It comes across really well. He, you know, to begin with, he very much treats her as cargo. He very much treats her as, you know, um, why the hell do I have to do this sort of thing? You know, it's just a job sort of thing. And he does grow a bond and attachment to her, and the actors that play both characters do a fantastic job of kind of creating that chemistry between them. And yeah, essentially, he finds out that they will have to kill her to create the vaccine. So he has none of it, and he slaughters every single person.
I mean, this is already at the hospital when
Yeah.
she's on the operating table,
Yes.
and then he finds out, and he has to sort of burst in there, and he sort of kills everyone there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and then he literally slaughters everyone, including the surgeons that are operating on her. And literally everybody. He kills the leader of the Fireflies, and he leaves with her. And then when she wakes up, he at the end of the game, she asks him straight out, you know, what happened, and he basically says to her that when they got there was lots of people who were immune, and she was kind of surplus to requirements, and they kind of left, and she just kind of believes him, and the game ends. And you know, it's kind of it's a dramatic irony that you're kind of left thinking you have lied to her there, Joel, but you've done a good thing in saving her. You know, why? And then there's this kind of moral thing of, do you sacrifice one 12, 13-year-old girl to save thousands of people with a vaccine, or do you kill lots of people to save her and walk away? And you know, it transpires in the second game that Joel would do that over again.
It is a good story. Thinking back now, it does make the whole journey completely pointless, you know, kind of thing. It's one of those stories, but it's kind of more about the characters, and it also does a good job of building the world. Now, of course, you've covered the whole game there, Peter, which is perfect because like you said, they wanted to create it as a direct follow-on from number one, and it turns out that a lot of what happens in number one is completely relevant to number two. It's not one of these sequels where it's a completely different story and you've just, you know, it's just the same characters in a new wacky situation. It is actually crucial what happened in the first game affects the second one. I'll let you go ahead with it.
No, yeah, you're right. And actually, I did read something from the writer again, who they actually had the idea of, because it does transpire that you are something that happened in the first game, which we'll get into, affects a character in the second game. They were going to do flashback scenes with this character and kind of do something that had happened in between the Last of Us 1 and The Last of Us Part 2. They were going to do flashbacks to something Joel did in the meantime. And actually, I think what they ended up doing and referencing characters in the first game was a lot better. So let's kind of get into that then. So what is it? Is it another kind of 4 years later or something like that? I can't.
Yeah, it's 5 years later after they've escaped from that hospital and the clutches of the Fireflies, and it seems like the Fireflies have all just fizzled out. It's really kind of it was the end of them, and Joel's gone back to his brother, who in the first game is the head of like this community, and they've been living there, and over the 5 years they've expanded the community, and they're kind of like all proper, you know, like veteran survivors of the post-apocalyptic world that they live in.
Yeah, and it feels kind of really safe in there, doesn't it? It's Jackson, it's called, isn't it? And it feels really kind of safe in there. You know, you've got this kind of community, and they're really trying to kind of build this sense of community and family with festivals and dances and bars and jobs and
this sort of mundane life.
Yeah, really. Well, life before the outbreak, I guess. Yeah, so that's really interesting. And then literally, not long into the game. It's literally within like the first hour, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I believe it is. I think I did it in about 45 minutes on my second playthrough.
So you're playing as kind of Ellie and Joel. They're now living in this place called Jackson. You switch to another character
completely randomly, and it's like, well, who the fuck is this?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, who the hell is this? Anyway, it transpires that you're playing as a character called Abby, and she's with her friend Owen, and they're traveling through the trees, and you're kind of thinking, who is this? Where the hell is this going? And they kind of come across on this kind of mountaintop. They come across Jackson, and I think Abby says something along the lines of, "He's got to be there."
Yeah, from this point onwards, because of the controversy of the game, I kind of guessed what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it kind of ruined it the first time round. But the second time round, because I knew it was coming, I was able to play a lot more sort of, I don't know, it felt better the second time round when it actually does happen. But yes. Yeah, go on, sorry.
So kind of, so fast forwarding then, so you plan as this character called Abby. She's clearly looking for someone. You quickly realise it's clearly going to be Joel. She goes off on her own for whatever reason. She gets herself caught in a bind, and she's saved, ironically, by Joel and his brother. And why can't
There's a very good moment when he says his name, but it's in the middle of the chaos of running from infected and that. And she gives him a look that you kind of don't really pick up the first time round, but or you probably did if you kind of suspected of what she's going to be doing. But you can sort of see they've added little details in like that for you to sort of pick out next time round.
Yeah, they have, and so Joel and his brother save Abby. It's quite clear that Abby knows who Joel is, but Joel has no idea who Abby is. They escape. Bear in mind, this is very early on in the game. They escape to Abby's hideout in a mansion that she's kind of taken refuge in with her crew.
Their little group, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then Joel and Tommy introduce themselves, and there's kind of you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. Basically everybody knows who Joel is, and
he even goes like, "Oh, you act as if you've heard of us before."
He does, exactly, and he quickly realizes, Joel, that they know who he is. Now, again, we're not going to go into every tiny little detail about the story, but I really do want to talk in detail, Dan, about that scene.
Okay.
Because I think it's probably one of the most important scenes, of a gaming generation. And so Abby proceeds to, I think she kneecaps Joel, doesn't she?
She shoots him with a shotgun and literally fucks up his entire knee and shin in one shot. In fact, at that moment, he goes, "Oh, you act as if you've heard of us." And he looks around to Abby, and she's got a shotgun, and she goes, "That's because we have." And then she blasts his leg, and he drops down, and you're like, "Shit!" And then someone goes over and absolutely batters Tommy's face in with a pistol butt, and you can tell he's not dead, but it's got to hurt.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, exactly. So obviously what happens after this is you kind of think, Abby's going to take Joel hostage, I guess. And in the meantime, Ellie's gone out looking for Joel because Joel and Tommy haven't come back from their run. Their run kind of around the perimeter and stuff like that. And she kills Joel. I say she kills him, that's an understatement.
Abby kills him.
Yeah, Abby kills Joel. Yeah, she kills him with a golf club, which has sparked an obscene amount of memes in the world. But speaking seriously for a minute, it is an absolutely horrendous act of brutality from Abby.
Yeah, Ellie actually gets to the house, and she walks in during Abby beating him up with this golf club. She's sort of taking her time with it, and Ellie gets sort of pushed to the floor and held down, and she's kind of she's not intentionally, but she's kind of forced to watch it almost happen.
Yeah, and she pleads with Joel to get up, and it's a horribly emotional scene, and I can imagine for the actors it must have been awful. But yeah, essentially Abby kills Joel, and then that sparks the entire game, I guess. You know, she kills Joel with one final swing of the golf club. She batters him. Joel never gets an explanation. Joel never gets any final words. Really, it's just he just kind of dies, and you're just left.
Yeah, we've got no idea why she's after Joel, why she's killed him. We sort of have our suspicions. Everyone's got their own suspicions, and sort of after that, Ellie, the game is essentially broken into two sections after that. I won't go too much into the second section first, but so the first sort of half of the game is Ellie goes on pretty much a revenge mission to go and find Abby to kill her, and she sort of works her way through her crew, finding them to get to Abby to find more information and push it forward. And it's quite good because you kill all these characters that you sort of vaguely saw at the beginning, you know, in Abby's little group, and it is essentially pretty straightforward, like the first game story. That sort of section is really sort of straightforward. It is just you're just trying to find Abby to kill her, job done, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you do come across some of these people that were in the room when Joel died, and you end up killing them. And you know, again, big journey. You know, you're traveling, or Ellie's character, Ellie, your character you're playing, Ellie is traveling with her companion Dina, who is you know, her love interest, and there's another couple of characters involved as well. They make it to, again, after killing some of these people who were in Abby's crew, they make it to a theatre where essentially
they use it as a base of operations, don't they?
Yeah, exactly that. And I mean, that's pretty much when the game completely shifts, right?
Well, there's kind of this moment where it's built up to this big sort of crescendo where she sort of killed one of Abby's friends, and it's kind of a big moment. She sort of killed a couple of the main people that Abby was knocking about with. And then she goes back to the theatre. She's shocked by what she'd done, because it turns out that one of the characters that she kills is pregnant, which kind of adds a whole new kind of bloody hell kind of element to it. And then at that moment, fucking Abby shows up, and she's got a gun to Tommy's head, because Tommy's involved as well at that point, and as well as killing one of the other real companions that you've got with you. And it's kind of like, oh fucking hell! And just as it's about to sort of explode into this big crescendo, it then switches.
Yeah, it does, and yeah, it completely switches. So again, just to recap on what Dan said there, you've killed these people, but you walk away going, oh, you know, clearly Abby knew them, but we're looking for Abby. She's the big monster that killed Joel. And then, as Dan says, Abby actually finds you before you find her, and basically says, you've killed all my friends. And then, as Dan says, the game suddenly switches. And in a turn of events, which I've not often, if ever, seen in a game before, you suddenly play as Abby.
Yeah, because the Ellie section is broken into 3 days. You go to the city of Seattle, and it comes up Seattle day 1, and then after a crucial moment, it comes up Seattle day 2, and then again you play through a load of the game, and after another crucial moment, it comes up Seattle day 3, and then at the end of that day is that big moment. But and then suddenly it comes up, like, it kind of cuts in the middle of that scene where Abby's sort of said, oh, you've killed all my friends, and she's got a gun there, and it comes up Seattle day 1, and then you're suddenly playing as Abby in like the group that she's in. Turns out they're a big community as well, living in a football stadium. And it's really, I'd like to point out that this I really enjoyed that bit, the sort of the stadium, to see how people are living in the apocalypse is really sort of cool, and how people are thriving, and that they did it really well. But just they kind of, and obviously this is taking place at the same point that Ellie's mission is just beginning. So they've kind of, Abby's story goes through day 1, day 2, and day 3, which we'll go into. But essentially, her story is running parallel with Ellie's story, and then at the end, it ties up. But they do a lot of things where it comes back to haunt you, because suddenly you start getting along with all these characters that you've realised, oh, fucking hell, actually, I remember killing you. Like when you're Ellie, when you get to the base where you think that Abby's at, but it turns out she's not, you kill this dog. You fall through the vent and you hit the ground. This fucking dog comes over and you just stab it. You know, instantly, job done. You've killed a bunch of dogs before in this game. It's no different. However, when you play as Ellie, like right at the beginning, you go to this as Abby, sorry, yeah, you go to this paddock and they open it up and this dog comes running up to you and you stroke it and you pick up this ball and you're throwing it about and playing fetch with it, and then they kind of call it along on the mission and it goes with one of the characters and you start thinking, oh, fucking hell, was that dog I killed? You know, and it's really kind of like they did do a good job on that. Like you do start thinking, oh bloody hell, I wish I hadn't killed him. He was well all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have no choice, obviously. But yeah, this dog, Alice, I actually noticed really late on. Oh my God, the dog that I killed as Ellie is Alice, who has been coming on these missions with Abby and her friends Mel and Owen and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is awful. The people Ellie have killed are actually quite lovable and nice people. There's even a section where again where Danny mentions toward the last person you kill as Ellie, Nora, you find her in the base and you kill her, and then when you're playing as Abby in the second half of the game, you see how helpful Nora is and how affected she is by all of the bodies piling up in the morgue and stuff like that. And in their crew, and it's quite. You just suddenly start seeing a different perspective on things. You know, you've been mindlessly killing a lot of people with Ellie to find this monster Abby, and you start learning quite quickly that Abby isn't this monster. And did she actually have a reason for killing Joel that we don't know about? Have we already figured it out? And by killing all of her friends, you know, you're kind of feeling bad for what you did in the first half of the game, and you're hit with this extreme moral dilemma and this moral compass of Christ, you know, what have I actually done?
And that really comes into it in like the final act of the game, which again we'll come back to. But thankfully, the game at that point, because there's been a few flashbacks before I get into some of Abby's ones. There is one monumental flashback with Ellie where you go. It's Ellie's birthday, and you're with Joel, so it's obviously before his death. And you go to this museum, and it's such a great scene, and not just because of the Jurassic Park references. I'd like to point that out, but it's so well that they added that in. It's just such a great scene. It mimics some of the amazing scenes from the first game, and you know, like the giraffe scene in the first game. It's pretty much exactly it has the same kind of feels that scene had.
Yeah, it does. And again, you know, this is what we mentioned at the beginning of the episode where we spoke about context. You know, there were leaks. People did find out that Joel died near the beginning of the game, or they didn't even know if it was near the beginning of the game or whatever, but they just saw those leaks and thought, how could they have done this to Joel? He's dead, it's all over, the game's shit. And actually, there are a lot of Joel scenes in the game, albeit them be flashbacks. There is a lot of Joel scenes, and they're all really amazing scenes. And the one Danny mentions is fantastic. You go to a museum with Ellie and Joel, and you experience the dinosaur museum and the space up top. And there's an amazing moment where they get into kind of like an old space shuttle, and Joel gives Ellie a tape with a spaceship launch audio on it, and she experiences that with her eyes closed, and she just gets to be a kind of kid again, something that she's not ever been able to really be growing up during, you know, an outbreak and a kind of a apocalyptic world, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, she's lived her whole life in this world, so she's never had real normality.
Exactly, yeah. So those flashbacks that Danny mentions are great, and there's a few really good Abby flashbacks as well. And the crucial flashback being Abby spending time with her dad out in the wilderness, and they find a randomly they
Zebra,
find
isn't it?
they find a zebra that's been kind of entangled in barbed wire, and they help it and stuff like that. And then during that flashback, somebody no, Owen, isn't it, he finds Abby and her dad and kind of says, look, something's happened back at base, we need you there now. And it turns out that Abby's dad is the head surgeon for the Fireflies, and they found out that they've had somebody immune delivered to them, and all of a sudden you think, oh my god, right, okay, that person's Ellie from the first game. This is a flashback to during the first game. He convinces the leader of the Fireflies, as in Abby's dad convinces the leader of the Fireflies that it's a good thing to operate and kill her to save thousands. A decision that I personally would never like to make. And Abby even says to her dad, if it was me, I'd want you to operate on me. And it just goes to show how similar Abby is to Ellie, because Ellie wants her whole life, the whole meaning of her life was to kind of be that vaccine, and Joel kind of took that away from her.
Yeah, there's flashbacks that kind of cover that as well, isn't there? She is angry because he denied her that choice of making her life purposeful.
That's exactly it. Ellie heads back in a flashback which you play, where she goes back to the old Firefly hospital and finds out that she was the sole immune survivor, and Joel kind of comes clean about it, and there's a lot of tension and anger between Joel and Ellie, and even before Joel dies, there's tension between Joel and Ellie, and it's quite heartbreaking to think that they left on quite bad notes of each other and stuff like that. However, again, jumping forward, there is a great scene with Joel and Ellie where they kind of almost make up slightly, which we'll come back to. But going back to Abby, and again, well, I know we're jumping around a bit here, but the whole point of the story is that it's a very kind of complicated, I guess, kind of two stories in tandem. Abby's dad, the head surgeon, is of course one of the ones that Joel kills when he.
Well, technically, you killed in the first game.
Me personally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did it as well, but yeah, you had to kill him in the first game, and he's just a nobody, really. Yeah. He's just an NPC that you shoot happily, but it does kind of make you think that all these NPCs could have these intertwined lives that are really complex and that.
Of course, and
we're just going around happily killing them.
Absolutely. Nobody's just a number, I mean, Joel slaughters scores of people in that Firefly hospital in the first game to save Ellie, and four of those, I think it's three or four of them, or even five of them, are surgeons in the room about to operate on Ellie while she's sedated, and he kills them, and one of them is Abby's dad, and suddenly you think, of course Abby came after Joel, and why wouldn't she come after Joel?
So in those 5 years, she spent the time trying to find out where Joel is. Now, thankfully for her, Tommy used to be a Firefly, so she's able to sort of work it out through that. Tommy obviously being his brother. And then, she's obviously found him and killed him and yada, yada, yada. And then a couple of months later is when Ellie finds out where Abby is, and that's kind of where our story picks up for both sections of the game, Ellie's section, and then we jump to Abby's section. Now, for me personally, don't get me wrong, I loved it. The problem I have is that Abby's game from this point onwards is kind of like a small story in itself. She has this story where her community is fighting against this other community called Scars. They're kind of like a religious cult. and she's fighting against them and her community is, and then she kind of ends up teaming up with a couple of them who have been like exiled from the cult, and she kind of learns that they are humans themselves, in the same sense that we kind of learned that the surgeons that we hate, that we killed in the first game are humans and have their own stories as well. And then she has this epic sort of this showdown with them where because it turns out they're all on this island, and it builds up this adventure that she has fighting these scars, and then she goes there and fights against the sort of heads of the scars and rescues one of them and whatnot. And And for me, I really enjoyed that section of the game. If not, it felt a little bit like a DLC, because I've been playing Ellie's game for like 12, 13 hours already. It kind of felt like I was playing a follow-up kind of game. And it's not until Abby's day 3 that suddenly gets thrown in, oh, by the way, this person's trying to kill you and all your mates are dead. So then she goes and confronts Ellie. And it kind of feels like it's a good story, but on its own, maybe Abby's section should have been sort of, I don't know, sort of mixed around to try and fit in a bit more with Ellie, sort of more intertwined, rather than being a completely separate story on its own. But
no, I think I don't disagree with that. I think that I think they probably, I don't know how they could have done it, but maybe they could have done it day by day. So you play as Ellie, then Abby, then Ellie, then Abby. I don't know how you feel about that.
That is probably how I would have done it. But then, of course, it doesn't justify the big reveal of it is good how they've done it in some regards, but I think maybe because Abby's section is just completely like a separate story at first anyway, at least for the majority of her section, which is, again, another 12, 13 hours of the game. So it's not until like the last couple of hours that it really then ties up with the first sort of story and Ellie's story. And by then, you've already forgotten sort of key moments because you've effectively played 2 full games, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, exactly that. Yeah, exactly. So it all builds up, doesn't it, with playing as Abby? It builds up to essentially finding Ellie, to making your way back to the theatre.
That moment we saw in Ellie's game, and now we're seeing it in Abby's game, maybe justified. Maybe Abby's sort of justified in what she did, and maybe Ellie's in the kind of wrong here, because all of our friends that we've seen through flashbacks and during the course of Abby's game, we've actually grown to quite like. Because one thing I quickly like to point out here is that some of the sub characters, the sort of the sidekicks in the game, like Dina and Owen and Jesse, are actually really likable. They're really they're good characters, and unfortunately the majority of them fucking die.
Yeah, exactly. And they die at the hands of Abby. But at the same time, on Abby's side, the majority of those characters, like Nora, Mel, and Owen, maybe not Mel, but they're very kind of likable. But Mel is kind of pregnant when Ellie kills her, and even though Ellie doesn't know that, it's still horribly brutal. And
because I didn't pick that up when it happened in Ellie's game. It was only when I was playing as Abby, they were like constantly talking about Mel being pregnant, and I was like, oh shit, I don't remember that. Oh fucking hell. I was kind of hoping she was had the baby before we kill her.
So essentially there is a big showdown in the theatre where you play as Abby now, and Ellie gets away, and in the theatre you have a big showdown where you're kind of fighting Ellie almost in a boss battle, and you have to kind of keep creeping up on her and kind of taking her out, and then eventually it kind of goes to a cutscene where essentially Abby beats the shit out of her, and you kind of do it, don't you? Yourself, and Dina kind of comes in and tries to save Ellie, and then Abby manages to kind of get Dina on the floor and is about to kill her, with Ellie kind of saying, she's pregnant, please don't kill her. But then you kind of, as Abby, thinking, well, you've killed my pregnant friend, so I'm going to kill yours. And then, yeah, well, for sure, and why not in many ways. And Last Knockings, Lev, who is one of the scars that Abby saves, comes in to the room and pleads with Abby to just let Dina live and to let Ellie live, and just to, it's done, we need to leave, let's just go. And Abby does. She kind of she doesn't kill Dina. She leaves Ellie kind of bleeding on the floor after she's beaten her, you know, quite badly. But she kind of decides, do you know what? I'm not going to take revenge on you. And she kind of leaves with Lev, and they both kind of leave together. And that's kind of almost like the first ending, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it kind of does a Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of thing, where then we have an epilogue that's still a good couple of hours long.
Okay, so then we get to the epilogue, essentially. So the kind of game, as I kind of mentioned, it kind of almost has a first ending, doesn't it? And then it kind of carries on. You know, as you mentioned, a bit like Red Dead. It kind of carries on almost, and you're kind of transported a few years later.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think it's only been a couple of months.
Well, how old is the little one at that time? Because Dina's had a baby at that point.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Actually, you're very right. Yeah. I think the baby is at least a few months old. It's not like a newborn baby. So yeah, you're right. It could even be a year later.
It could be.
Let's get all the furniture for their farmhouse.
Yeah, exactly. So Dina and Ellie are in the farmhouse, leading a kind of a seemingly nice life, and you do a couple of kind of farmstead things, don't you? And then Ellie kind of experiences some kind of PTSD, doesn't she, of Joel when she's rounding up the sheep, and she has kind of what seems to be, I mean, Dina kind of comes to her rescue and kind of helps snap her out of it. So it kind of seems like it's an ongoing thing, you know, that she's experiencing. She can't quite let go of the fact that, you know, Joel was killed, and it kind of it's still in her head and it's still unresolved, you know, because Abby walked away. You know,
it's kind of it is really unresolved, as you say. It's kind of like, because Abby's kind of bested her, even though she set out to kill Abby. Abby's kind of bested her and have just kind of left it at that. So she's tried to get on with her life, and it's not really. It's like her demons have come back to haunt her, almost, kind of thing.
That's it. And then on her way back to the farm one day after doing some hunting, she experiences after experiencing the PTSD, after we see her experiencing that, she's one day out hunting and she comes back to see a horse outside the farm. And it's no other than Tommy, Joel's brother, who has come to visit her and Dina, and he essentially tells her that he has intel on a woman built like an ox traveling with a young kid, which must be Lev, you know, the one Abby saved and kind of walked away and left Dina and Ellie on, you know, bloody on the floor.
Which is quite surprising, because Tommy's actually seemingly killed in the sort of theatre house conflict. And I get shot in the head, and I kind of thought, oh well, he's dead. And then so I was quite surprised when I saw the horse. I was kind of thinking, who's this going to be? And then I was quite surprised. You see, it's Tommy, and he's got a bit of a mangled face from being shot in it. And he's actually quite an important character, even though we don't really think about him as much as some of the other characters. He's actually quite a key character in this story, at least.
Yeah, well, and if you think, if you think about it, at the beginning of the first game, when Joel's daughter is shot by the military, Joel is about to get shot by the guy who's just shot his daughter, and it's actually Tommy that saves Joel by shooting this military guy in the head, and they get away. So actually, Tommy,
so he's been there. He's been there like throughout the whole journey, if you know what I mean.
From the beginning, yeah, exactly. So essentially, Dina kind of kicks Tommy out and says, "Look, you can't do this. This is, you know, this is our life now. You know, we're kind of over it." but Ellie just can't kind of get it out of her head, and one night decides, I'm going back after Abby. I need to resolve this. I need to kill her, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially Dina kind of says to her, well, it's me and the kid or Abby, and Ellie chooses Abby and leaves. And so we're then kind of transported to Abby's storyline of, with Lev. She's headed to Santa Barbara, which has always been somewhere she kind of planned on going, because she had heard rumours of a new and secret Firefly organisation getting back together, and she wants to kind of be reunited with her own people who her dad worked for, who she worked for, and all of that kind of stuff. So
it was kind of Owen's dream as well, to go and meet all these people, and with him dead, she kind of feels that she wants to sort of carry that on for him as well.
Exactly, and long story short, she, in trying to find them, she gets captured by. I was going to ask you, actually. She gets captured by
they're kind of slavers, aren't they?
Yeah, they're slavers, and you don't really ever find much out about them, do you? But she's captured. Her and Lev are captured by these slavers, and she kind of just disappears, Abby, after they capture her, right?
Yeah, they're kind of a means to an end, if you know what I mean. They're kind of like just a random group for her to be captured by, but not really relevant in the grand scheme of things. You know, they're just kind of an antagonist and a bit of a situation for Abby to be in for when Ellie eventually encounters her.
For sure. I mean, it would be really interesting to find out more about them, though, I must admit, because they are slavers, like you say. They're a really weird kind of a group of people that tend to just try and capture people, right? So
yeah, it's a bit weird. They've also got like infected captured as well. So it's not really sure. I'm not really sure what they're actually doing.
Yeah,
maybe we'll get a comic book or a DLC, hopefully, that might go into it more. But I very much doubt all that. But
that would be really cool, actually,
to find out more about her.
Yeah, that would be really cool, because you do actually end up saving quite a few of them, and we'll come back to it. But they essentially burn down this whole place, and but you do save a load of captors, don't you? A load of captors, and then they kind of turn on. They turn on the whole slavers and kind of take them down, basically, and you can hear it in the background. But we'll come back to that. So then you go back to Ellie, who has travelled to Santa Barbara, off of the intel that Tommy gave her. She's looking for Abby, and she is, funnily enough, captured by the same people that captured Abby. And she manages to get out and kill them and convince one of them to tell her where Abby is, where this woman built like an ox is, essentially.
Not after brutally getting really injured as well during this.
Very injured.
She gets impaled a bit by a tree, and it's really kind of like, because the sort of getting hurt in The Last of Us in the cutscenes or whatnot always felt really real and raw. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, she gets bitten as well, doesn't she, during that? But obviously it doesn't matter because she's immune, right?
Yeah, but they don't realise that, and they're absolutely shitting it. Like, oh no, what's it matter? You'll turn before you get there, kind of thing. Is what they say to her.
Sure. So she catches up to Abby's captures. She takes them out. She kind of one-man armies them, and she finds Abby after freeing a load of these slavers, and as I say, the slavers kind of starting to destroy and kill all of their captives. So that's all going on while you're going to hunt down Abby, who's been strung up on a beach for trying to escape. And
they've almost been like crucified. These people. There's quite a few of them on this beach. All these sort of these crosses, and you kind of have to find Abby. And actually, when you do find her, I didn't really recognise her. You know, I thought, oh no, that's not Abby. But I think she's been there for quite a while, because I think she's slimmed down. Like her arms ain't as bulky as they have been throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, and she looks very different.
Yeah, I almost didn't recognise her.
Yeah, same. It was very strange seeing her like that, and clearly we don't know how long she's been there. We know that. Ellie's potentially been at the farm for at least a year, maybe 2. We don't know that. So it seems that way. So she could have been there for a very long time, a matter of months, So she's very dishevelled, very kind of destroyed. Ellie kind of helps her down, and she doesn't even really pay attention to Ellie. She just gets Lev down, and who's also being crucified and strung up, and she gets Lev down and kind of tells Ellie, right, the boats, there's boats this way, follow me. And Ellie kind of just goes along with it, as if to say, you know, who are you? Why aren't you angry? Why aren't we fighting? You know, what the hell's going on? And at this point, Ellie is in a lot of pain. She's been impaled, she's been beaten, all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, from the journey through Santa Barbara. And they make it to the sea where there's a boat waiting there.
Two boats.
Yes.
Boat for each of them.
Boat for each of them. And Abby goes to, well, Abby puts Lev on the boat and kind of says, right, you know, I'm off, basically. And Ellie's kind of like, no, you're not. You know, we need to finish this. Yeah. So
yeah, I kind of weren't expecting this outcome to occur because of the way the sort of scene was going. I thought, oh well, Ellie kind of feels that she's redeemed herself by rescuing her to make herself feel better. Like she's the better person in this because she's kind of almost forgiven her and rescued her, you know, kind of thing. Yeah. Even though she wanted her dead, but ultimately she does then turn around and think, no, fight me, you bitch.
Yeah, exactly. You know? So she holds a well, Abby doesn't want to fight her. She's got bigger fish to fry. So Ellie holds a knife to Lev's neck and kind of says, no, you know, it's you. I'm going to kill this kid if you don't fight me. So they have like this amazing kind of fight scene where it's more Ellie, isn't it, really? And Abby's just kind of Abby's just kind of holding back.
Abby, poor Abby, she's been bloody crucified for God knows how long.
Yeah.
And she's lost all that weight and like all her muscle and that. Because obviously in the theatre, she absolutely batters Ellie in. So it's kind of Ellie's got to rely on her stealth, whereas here they're a bit more evenly matched.
They are, yeah, exactly, yeah. Whereas if it was, yeah, you're right, actually, if it was a few months earlier, Abby would have wiped the floor with Ellie, clearly.
Yeah.
But so they have a massive punch up and basically
it's really brutal.
Yeah, it's really brutal. It's an amazing battle scene where they're knocking each other down. Abby actually bites Ellie's fingers off at one point, two of her fingers off, which is
guitar
amazing.
Playing fingers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Ellie manages to get Abby down and starts drowning her in the sea. And when you think this is it, she's finally done it, Ellie just decides, no, I'm going to let you up. And you're just like, what? What the hell? I must admit, I thought she was going to kill her.
I thought she had her underwater for well too long.
Yeah, exactly. So she lets her up and kind of just says, just go, basically. Take Lev and go. And Abby just kind of walks off, gets on the boat, and kind of sails away with Lev, and Ellie's left sitting in the water just contemplating the fact that she let Abby go. So a very strange ending, a very strange turn of events, and she ends up going back to the farm to see that Dina and the baby are gone, as she probably expected, and she leaves the farm as well, leaving Joel.
There's a little moment when she tries to play the guitar and she can't because she's got a couple of fingers missing.
Yes, that's savage. And she kind of just leaves Joel's guitar behind and leaves the farm, and that's kind of the ending.
Yeah, that is. There's a little bit as well. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I was actually going to mention this to you. But the title sequence, you know, not a title sequence, like the front menu when you load the game up. Originally, it's just a picture of a boat sailing in some rocky waters. And there's nothing else. Obviously, you've got continue and new game and load game, etc. But after you complete it, there is a shot of like a beach with the boat that Abby sails off on the beach, and there's a building in the distance, and I think it kind of hints that Abby does eventually find these fireflies, because just before she got captured by the slavers, she's on the radio and she manages to get through to the fireflies, and they say where they're at, and as she's leaving, she obviously gets captured.
but I think it kind of hints that, yeah, Abby made it to where she wanted to go afterwards.
Wow,
That
that's
was
really
my
interesting.
interpretation of that.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no, I didn't know that, and that's really interesting. I wasn't sure whether when she called the fireflies whether that was a trap, but no, clearly she was calling the fireflies. She just happened to run into these slavers as well, who were clearly tracking her. But it is really interesting that she potentially found the fireflies, and it makes you wonder whether there could ever be a DLC with Abby, because we never really got closure with Abby, did we? Apart from maybe that kind of title screen, as you say. In a way,
Sorry, go on.
In a way, it's nice for it to kind of to end like that, and just seeing and kind of almost having the hint that her and Lev did make it to the Fireflies, rather than it being literally spelled out in a DLC. But who knows?
Yeah, because it kind of ends on quite a somber note if you think of it just with the actual ending of Ellie's story, because obviously she's got no fucking fingers to play the guitar. She's lost everything, because there's a good proverb that exists, an old one, which says that those who seek revenge should dig two graves, and that kind of implies that if you're going to go kill the person you want revenge against, then you're probably going to end up dying as well. And I think that kind of applies here, even though both people survive. And I think this goes for both Abby and Ellie, because both of their stories are really about revenge. And I think that really applies to both of them. Even though they both survive, they kind of lose everything. So Abby wants revenge for her father, but ends up losing everyone she knows. She gets kicked out of her settlement she's in, and she's on her own pretty much. And Ellie obviously gave up her life with Dina and that to go after revenge against Abby for a second time, and ends up worse off at the end of it. And it's kind of like, both of you probably shouldn't have done that, girls,
No, not at all. But then, tragedy and trauma makes people do crazy things, and that's the whole point of The Last of Us, isn't it? Is that when you're playing it, you kind of think, what would I do if I was in this situation? And I would probably do the same thing. I
would have probably shit it and put a gun to my head the second those infected started running at me. I can't. Run that great.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
I mean, you made a good point there about how similar they were, and I made a couple of notes, about how they're kind of both involved in kind of quite a love triangle. You've got Dina, who was with Jesse, and kind of now with Ellie, and then you've got Mel and Owen, who were kind of together having a baby, but Owen is a love interest of Abby as well. You've got both of them that have experienced severe loss, and are desperately seeking revenge. And then they both make the decision not to see the revenge through and to let the other go. So you kind of feel that in a different world, they would have been good friends. Maybe they would have respected each other, and if their paths hadn't crossed as they did, Abby and Ellie would make an amazing team. That's kind of how I looked at it as well at the end.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a very interesting story, because obviously from Ellie's perspective, Abby's just kind of a cardboard cutout bad guy, kind of thing. She just kills someone that she loves, and now she wants revenge to kill her. But obviously it's a little more in depth than that. And I think the game does do a good job of showing us that.
It does. And we've
it's kind of like every.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about context, and I think that's why a lot of people had issues with the game when the leaks came out, because you had these leaks detailing Joel's death. You had these leaks explaining that there was a trans character in the game, which turned out to be Lev, and that was the whole.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that, to be fair. I mean, because I totally missed that they were. I can't remember the actual term, but they were calling Lev, whose real name is Lily, I believe.
Yeah.
And they were calling her by Lily when they were trying to hunt her down, and. No, I didn't pick that up. And I actually thought Abby was the character purely because of how bulky she was. So I do apologise for that.
No, yeah, and just for context, Lev is part of the Scars, as we mentioned, and she has her sister Yara, and she is actually kicked out for cutting her hair because she identifies as a boy, but she's actually a girl, and the Scars don't like that, and they essentially want to kill her for that, and Abby really sympathizes with Lev and Yara for that, and it just goes to show Abby's kind of kind nature, and her, she doesn't agree with that, and she wants to kind of help them, and it's another win in my book for Abby, because it shows how nice Abby actually is, and so it's another kind of.
I feel that we kind of come away from this actually more on Team Abby over Team Ellie.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we'll definitely come back to that 100%, because I do want to ask you the question, Team Ellie or Team Abby. One thing I did just want to kind of quickly say though, with kind of the ending, I'd kind of mentioned context, and I think if you had just read Joel dies, there's a trans character, there's lesbians in it, there's a gay love story in it, you would kind of just go, well, a lot of people were kind of just going, oh right, they've just made this story for that. But when you actually play the game in context, it's not that at all. It's actually the characters are done amazingly well, and who gives a shit that Abby's big and bulky and not your kind of conventional female? If anything, it makes her character a lot different to Ellie, and it kind of shakes the story up a little bit. So again, I just feel that, as with everything, I always say this with every game I play, is I need to finish that game, and I need to get right to the end to be able to have context and make my own decision on it. And like always, like I said with Final Fantasy VII, I wanted to make sure I saw the ending. I had heard that there was a controversial ending. I wanted to experience that myself. And it was the same with this game as well. People just jump down the throat of things just because the rest of the community is doing it. And it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. There was a lot of mob mentality, wasn't there? Where you go on Metacritic and you look, and a lot of the posts are for a lot of the user reviews are from before the game even come out, and they're all saying exactly the same thing. How they've ruined the story and this, that, or the other, and it's purely because they've read the story online. And as we said at the beginning of this episode, was that you really need to sort of experience the story without it being spoilt for you. Because to be honest, sure, maybe I'm annoyed at Joel's death, but I would be annoyed at that regardless. I'm not really. I'm about as annoyed as Ellie is, but purely from a relatable kind of story aspect. Like, I've played as Joel in the first game, and I love Joel, But his death, ultimately, it serves as the purpose of the story. So I'm completely fine with him dying, and that being the whole purpose of the story.
For sure, exactly. It wasn't just done as shock value, right? You're absolutely right there. It's done for a reason. It's not just done so we go, oh, see, you didn't see that coming. That's not what they were doing. And if you experience the game for yourself, you'll kind of understand that. You've made a good point there. Team Ellie, Team Abby. It's really interesting. I kind of feel that people who haven't played the game are just going to be Team Ellie, because they just automatically look at The Last of Us and how lovable, to an extent, Ellie was, and how great her relationship with Joel was. So where do you stand? Are you Team Ellie or Team Abby?
Well, I'm not overly a big fan of Ellie herself, I must admit. I can't really relate to her in sort of a sense, because she's a very she feels a bit sort of modern-y. I mean, The Last of Us 2 has got a lot like kind of woke kind of things in it, and I feel Ellie's maybe kind of bordering on a bit of that, which she kind of gets on my nerves a bit. But to be fair, she's still pretty badass in that. But ultimately, Abby does become the more sympathetic character, even though she is painted as the antagonist. And by the end of it, I think, you know what? Yeah, I think I'm on Abby's side.
Yeah, no, I don't.
What about yourself?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I feel very similar. I actually do like Ellie. I do feel what Ellie's been through makes an excuse for how moody, emo she can sometimes be. But at the same time, I agree with you. I think when you experience Abby's story, when you first start playing as Abby, you think, who the hell is this imposter? Where's my Joel and my Ellie time? But once you actually experience playing as Abby, you see her relationship with Owen, you see her human side, you see how much kind of love she's got to give to her friends, and how much, her father's deaths hurt her just as much as Joel's deaths hurt Ellie. You do end up sympathising her. You're absolutely right. So, yeah, Team Abby for me. I really like her. If there was a DLC to come out, I'd love to play as Abby again.
Yeah, 100%.
I highly doubt there will. But one really good point. But before we kind of finish on the story, that I wanted to make, is I saw this by a Reddit user, which I thought was really interesting. That's actually, they spoke a lot about the cycles being broken. So, you had Joel killed somebody, and then that person come after him, and then that meant that Ellie went after Abby, and then obviously Ellie let Abby go, and Abby let Ellie go, and it kind of broke the cycle of kind of anger. Because if you imagine, had Ellie killed Abby in the water and left, that Lev would have grown up and gone after Ellie, and then the cycle
That's a great point.
So it was a lot about breaking the cycle, and that's not my own observation. That's an observation I read somewhere. But
you could have passed it off as your own, though.
Oh, mate, that's not what we're here for. No. So yeah, before we kind of give the game a score, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about our kind of favourite moments. I mean, one of my most favourite moments my favourite moment of the game was actually the museum scene, which we've kind of gone through. But what about you? Was there any points of the game that really stood out for you?
Well, there's two that I really enjoyed. One was kind of there's this scene which I think they teased when they first announced the game at one of the E3s, and it's kind of a scene where Abby gets captured by the Scars and they try and hang her, and then this woman shows up who turns out to be Yara, and she gets one of her arms broken, and it kind of all kicks off, and it's a really savage scene, and then suddenly all clickers and infected show up, and you've got to run through all these woods while being chased, and it's quite a terrifying scene, and it kind of ends with this kind of almost like a boss fight against this giant German-looking woman, which was a bit random, but it was epic. It was epic nonetheless, and it was just a great scene from start to finish. When I was playing that, bearing in mind it is quite far into the game. That's a good. We're talking 16, 17 hours into the game. When I was playing that, I was like, you know what? This is really what I wanted from this game. This kind of moment. So I was a little bit gutted that it wasn't in sooner, but I was still happy that it was there nonetheless.
Yeah, it was a very good horror scene. Running through the dark woods, it's pissing down with rain, and you're being attacked left, right, and centre. I thought it was great too. I completely agree. And actually, that scene that you're talking about, where Abby's being hung, it's actually Yara who saves her, as you say, and she's with Lev. So that's when we're introduced to them. And you kind of think, who are these kind of characters? Who are they? What, and then you end up, especially Lev, you end up loving them, and you end up kind of really growing an attachment to them. So very, very, very cool. I completely agree. There was one scene I wanted to actually bring up before you say your other one, and that was, I loved the scene between. It was a flashback scene between Joel and Ellie, and obviously we had already seen a flashback where Ellie finally confronts Joel and says, "Look, tell me the truth," and then Joel tells her the truth, and she basically tells him to get away from her. But then there's another great scene between them both back at Joel's house in Jackson, where Ellie kind of tells Joel that she can't forgive him for what he did, but she's going to try. And
that's right soon near his death as well. So it's kind of like that's kind of like one of the last moments they have together.
It is, and you don't see that until later on in the game. So you think that they've fallen out over what happened at the dance, where you mentioned earlier in the episode where somebody is being homophobic towards Dina and Ellie, and Joel steps in, and Ellie's kind of like, I can take care of myself type thing, and that's the last you think the last interaction you think they had before Joel dies, but it's not. Seeing this scene where they're both outside Joel's house on his porch, and they kind of, Joel essentially apologizes but says, I would do it again if I had the chance, and Ellie says, I can't forgive you, but I'm going to try. It's a nice moment, and I really, really enjoyed that scene. Really great acting.
Yeah. No, that is a great scene. My last scene that I'll mention here is you kind of, it builds up to it. You get to this hospital where it's as Abby, and it's being like it's been taken over by the community that you work for, and they're kind of like, oh, we haven't checked the basement, we haven't checked the lower levels yet, we can't get down there because that was kind of ground zero for the infection, and we haven't dared go down there, and no one's been down there in like 25 years. And for me, that was kind of like, oh shit, is that like, what, you're talking ground zero of the infection? And it was
so
kind
ground
of like,
zero is
really
like
exciting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so ground zero is that like where the infection started then?
At least in that city, that's kind of the vibes I was getting. I don't know whether it's the infection, the start of it. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. Or maybe that's what they were getting at. But at least for the city, is 100% where it started there. And it's kind of like, for me, it was really interesting because I wanted to see it, but at the same time, I didn't want to go down there because I have no fucking idea what's down there, And needless to say, I was not disappointed what was down there.
Yeah, it's kind of eerily quiet to begin with, and Abby keeps saying stuff like, "This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be," and I'm thinking to myself, "Stop saying that, because I know what's going to happen. Something fucking horrible is going to happen." And down there is just it's horrifying, isn't it? There's a lot of enemies locked behind doors, which are tied to kind of an electronic lock, and you're looking for a generator, so you know those doors are going to open. And walking through it and kind of hearing these noises, she also goes to a door and she hears something massive behind it, doesn't she? Hears like like a big stomp, kind of growling. You think, what the fuck is that? And then
we've only ever seen a few types of infected throughout the course of the game. There's only about, I mean, they do introduce a new type in this one, but we won't get into all that now. And normally the game only has about 5 different types of enemies in it that aren't human. And so for this thing, it was kind of like, what the fucking hell could that be, And it just turns out it's this enormous mass of like bloaters and clickers together. It was really, for me, it was like a really epic moment, because you kind of get into this ambulance in this underground parking lot, and it's kind of it walks past the window, and it's enormous, and you're kind of like, fucking hell, have I got to fight that?
Yeah, and just to explain a bit about the outbreak and the infection. So you are infected, right? And then this kind of fungus inside you continues to grow and take over your brain, and over the years kind of grows and grows and bursts out of your skull, and then you kind of lose all your kind of your old mind, and you're kind of not there anymore, and you're just kind of a walking mushroom zombie thing, right? And then you kind of, the longer people are left with this infection, the bigger the fungus grows, and the more stronger these kind of essentially humans get, because they were humans, and they become, and this thing must have just been festering down, like you said, from ground zero, festering down in the labs, in the basements for so long. And
it's even all growing over the walls and stuff, like corpses as well. You see it a lot in the game. You'll see a lot of corpses on the ground that have got loads of fungus growing off them, growing up the walls and all that. So it's just like, because it's based off the cordyceps fungus from like the insect world in real life. It's just that story has just transferred over to humans and that, but it's cool with the little touches like that. So you get down there and there's just loads of mushrooms everywhere, like all fungi growing out of the walls and everything. It's really like aesthetically pleasing to the eye as well as terrifying.
It's an amazing kind of it's quite simple, quite a simple concept, but it's just just really cool the way it kind of all grows and sends people crazy and all of that. But yeah, no, that was an unbelievably scary scene. I remember you had done it before me, and you said to me like, "There's something coming up which is just horrible," and I was just thinking to myself, God, I just want to get it over with, because if Danny thinks it's horrible, I'm going to think it's really horrible, because I can't deal with horror bits.
Yeah, because you kind of get stuck in that. You get stuck in an area. Needless to say, it's quite a big area, and then you have to fight it.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realise was that when you're fighting it, a clicker kind of comes off of it, like detaches itself. And at first, I thought, oh bloody hell, there's going to be clickers down here as well as this monster. And if this monster grabs you, it just insta kills you in one. So you've just got to stay away from it. But eventually, you do kill it, and you think, oh, brilliant. And then not long after it. Like, we're talking the next encounter, you have to fight that clicker that fell off it, and it's like a super clicker that's got all these new abilities and stuff. And that was actually a really tough fight straight after that massive boss battle.
Yeah, it was really hard. I didn't enjoy that at all. In many ways, I would have preferred it to be this kind of pathetic little thing that she kind of executes. In kind of many ways, that could have been quite savage. You can have
I think that's a good idea.
Imagine having the choice to kind of leave it or put it out of its misery, but it was a hard little fucker to fight. I didn't enjoy that at all. So I was really glad when it was done and I saw daylight again. Yeah, so overall, Dan, The Last of Us 2, where do you stand on it? Is it a game that you'd recommend to people? Do you think it stands up with the original, the first part? Do you think it deserves the criticism it got?
No, of course not. I don't think it deserves any of the criticism it got. For me, it's not, like you said earlier, it's not a necessary sequel. You know, it's not like number one ended on a cliffhanger and we need answers. It's kind of another story on top. I don't agree that it is, you know, part two of the same story. I feel kind of it is a new story in that regard, even though it does follow on from situations caused by things that happened in number one. But ultimately, I do really like it. You know, the gameplay's spot on. Everything about the game is top notch. My only qualm with it, my major qualm that lost it a couple of points in my eyes, is just kind of the way the story's told. Is because I really enjoyed Abby's story, but her whole story feels like a separate story that's in the middle of the main story, and it kind of feels like, you know, it's not really told in the best possible way, but the story itself is still good. So it's kind of hard to be moaning about that. So, you know, for me, it's definitely at least an 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
What about for yourself? How do you feel?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything you said there. And I think we mentioned earlier that we both would have preferred the game for Abby's storyline. And by the way, I just want to say, I think the Abby storyline was brilliant. I think the Ellie storyline was brilliant. But running them in tandem with each other rather than kind of having Ellie's and then bolting on Abby's and you know, having them kind of both opposite ends of the game, that felt like it would have been nicer to maybe have had them running day one Ellie and day one Abby, and then day two Ellie and then day two Abby, and that would have made you kind of remember things a bit more. It would have kept you kind of, you know, rooting for Ellie and then rooting for Abby and then rooting for Ellie again, and you know, maybe that would have been a little bit better, but I don't know really. But I agree with you. One thing I will say, when I score games out of 10, and you know, listen, at the end of the day, some people like score systems, some people don't. When I score, if I was to ever score a game out of 10, which I will say I would never score a game out of 10. Maybe Final Fantasy VII, you know, because of the love that I've got for it. Not the remake. Maybe Final Fantasy VII, the original game, I would score a 10 out of 10. But even like one of my most favourite games of all time, The Witcher 3, I would score that a 9 out of 10. The Last of Us, I would score a 9 out of 10. So, and I agree with you. I would give The Last of Us 2 an 8 out of 10, and I mean that in the most positive, this is an amazing game kind of way. You know, it really is a stunner game, but it certainly could have had elements to it which were a little bit better. And I I asked you the question, do you think that it deserved the stick it got? And you said no, and I completely agree with that as well. I can't disagree with you either. I have to say that it got way too much stick. I think people took stuff out of context and didn't take it in context of the storyline. I don't think they experienced Abby how we've experienced Abby, and
yeah, I worry as well that it will affect future games in the series. You know, will they bother making a Last of Us 3 or Part 3 or whatever? Because they're thinking, oh, they didn't really like number 2. You know, it's not going to sell well, or even though it has sold well, they might think, oh, you know what, it's got really bad reviews for this, that, and the other. Let's can it.
That is a good point, and it is a worry. But one thing I will counter on that is that reviewers who had actually played the game ahead of it coming out did review the game extremely well, and that was a really positive thing. Whereas there was people reviewing the game, users reviewing the game poorly within days that it come out, and they couldn't have played the game and completed the game in that time. So, as you mentioned, a bit of mob mentality. We've seen with the likes of Game of Thrones that there is a certain amount of self-entitlement that fans think they have, where they think they've got a divine right to a say in somebody else's creation, and what would give us the right to turn around and say, you know what, the directors of Game of Thrones fucked up and they're a disgrace. Well, what gives us the right to say that when we're sitting on our ass consuming it? And it's the same with we're allowed to criticize and we're allowed to not enjoy something, but the self-entitlement and the anger, that's something that I personally think needs to stop across films, across TV, and across games, because there's a lot of spoiled brats out there, is what I'm saying.
No, you're very right, mate. And I think you've hit the nail right on the head there.
Yeah. Well, cheers, Dan, and I really appreciate chatting with you today about it. I mean, during lockdown, we've obviously not got to spend much time chatting about games, so these podcasts have been a real breath of fresh air for me. These episodes, and I've been so glad to finally have a long chat with you about The Last of Us 2. So yeah,
mate, it's been very good. Cheers for it.
Yeah, awesome, and thanks everyone for listening. If you made it this far. We're trying to do as much content as we can. We're going to be doing an episode on the Xbox conference, which is coming up this month, I think, Dan, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it might be next week or maybe the week after.
Absolutely. So we'll be covering that like we did the Sony conference. That'll be really awesome. And any new games that we're kind of playing, we'll definitely be reviewing. We'll have some retrospectives coming out. So lots more content to come. So yeah, that's all then, I guess, Dan. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, mate, always a pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening.
Yes, over and out, and we'll see you next time.